You are listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I am your host, Celine Yeager. Each week, I bring you advice from athletes, scientists, researchers, and other experts to help you feel and perform your best no matter what your hormones are doing. This show is a production of Feisty Media. Hello, strong, feisty women. I hope you all are well. So I want to say right up top, thank you to everyone who has bought their tickets to the first ever Feisty Fest that is happening in one short month right in my backyard in the beautiful Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, which is conveniently located between New York City and Philadelphia. We are going to have such a good time. Swim clinics, lifting clinics, running clinics, pickleball lessons, educational sessions, fun rides, runs, trying the track on the velodrome. You name it, we are going to do it. It's going to be a blast. If you haven't yet, head into those show notes and check it out. I hope to see you in September 18th through the 20th. We'll also be doing a live podcast recording, so I will see you there. Okay, so this week, I have a pretty fascinating conversation about weight health, which you'll notice I did not say weight loss, because this week's guest, best-selling dietitian Ashley Koff, encourages everyone to think about their weight differently. Not a number on the scale, but rather to lean into what your weight can tell you based on where it is and how it's impacting your broader health. She also gives us a master class in our weight health hormones like GLP-1, GIP, PYY, and more. And if any of those names sound familiar, those are the same hormones that are synthesized to make the weight loss drugs that we hear so much about today. Ashley thinks of those hormones, the ones we make naturally, as our weight health hormones, and thinks of the drugs as weight health hormone replacement therapy, which I found to be really interesting framing, especially because there are things we can do to optimize our natural weight health hormones. So we dig into all of that, as well as why digestion and hydration have to be optimized before we even start to think about putting nutrition into the conversation. Ashley has been a practitioner for more than 25 years. She's the author of the new USA Today best-selling book, Your Best Shot, and founder of the Better Nutrition Program. You'll find links to all of that in the show notes. It was a really fascinating conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Okay, before we get to it, give us a follow at Feisty Menopause on Instagram and Facebook. Come on in and join tens of thousands of women just like you in our private Hit Play Not Pause Facebook group. And head into those show notes and sign up for my free weekly Feisty 40 Plus newsletter with all the training and nutrition news you can use. If you like this show, please share it with a friend or drop 5 stars. And you could do both in your preferred podcast platform. It really does help others find us and for the show to continue to grow. Finally, super quick thanks to Wahoo for their continued support. I have this hellish, awful treadmill hill workout I do every Wednesday morning in preparation for the Grand Traverse that I'm doing in October. And I've got to say, their Wahoo Kicker Run is simply, hands down, the best treadmill I've ever used. It makes the torture fun, sort of, you know what I mean. But anyway, thank you, Wahoo, for making really such great stuff. I've been a Wahoo user forever, so you can check them out in the show notes for yourselves. And with that, enough of me. Let's have a few words about our awesome sponsors and get on with the show. All right. Ashley Koff, welcome to the show. And we were talking a bunch offline, and I was just like, we need to stop. So we need to capture some of this and talk about it online. So thank you for coming on the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you. I loved being discovered by you because now I've discovered you, and I love it, and I love your community. So thank you. Yeah.
Oh, thanks so much. And, I never really know when I reach out how symbiotic or simpatico, people are with the community, because we're a bit of outliers. Not everybody is super active, let alone doing some things that quote unquote normal people would call crazy. But you do crazy stuff too, because you just told me that, you are 52, you're straight in our demographic, and you just did an Everesting in Oregon. That's where Rainier,
Yes.
Washington.
Well, it's Washington. Thank you. Because I told
Yeah.
everyone I live in Oregon. I told everyone it was in Oregon. And then I'm like, wait, I'm going to Washington. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's Washington.
Rainier, Washington. Yeah. Yeah. I have to say the only great thing about that is Rainier and the Pacific Northwest are a bit of a menopausal woman's dream because it was so cold. So the great part about my event, everybody else was dying, and I had like begrudgingly bought myself a pair of shorts. I battled my weight as a kid, and I have bigger thighs, and I have always just had an issue with like feeling like people make fun of me for my size. So I've never worn shorts, but I was like, I'm not going to not be able to do this event because I just in my head decided it was going to be hot. Well, we got up there and it was like my jam. It was cold. It was raining. It hailed when I was hiking at 3:00 in the morning. And I was like, all right, we can do hard things in the cold, so it was great on that part. Yeah, absolutely.
So for people who don't know, before we get into the conversation about the book, what you did was you hiked up and down the mountain until you got the cumulative vertical gain of Mount Everest, which is 29,029 feet, correct?
Yes, correct. Exactly.
How long
so you
did it
take
take
the gondola down.
Oh,
Well,
okay. That's good. You don't have to hike down because
Oh,
my
yeah.
Lord.
No.
Okay.
And that's that would be so, it would be so bad for your body. There would be all sorts of things. But the interesting thing is the gondola's only 10 minutes. So you have such a so what I did for the first 6 was I went up, I came down the gondola, I marked the board, I went up, and I just unrepeat. And I was doing so well that my coach and the team there said, you can probably slow down, you're ahead of your pace. Why don't you go have dinner? And I went and had quote unquote dinner, and I laid in the boots, the Normatec boots. And the next time I went up the mountain halfway up, I had horrible diarrhea and I just lost everything. And I was like, darn, so also stick with your own plan. You don't have to listen to somebody else. But I don't know whether it was that or whether it was, the other thing is I think everyone's pushing electrolytes on you and you're and I was I just needed water. My system was just stop, you're nodding your head. Yeah, you get it.
Well, I used to be a mountain bike stage racer, so there was days of this kind of behavior.
Yes.
And the hardest part is that gut piece because you're putting in so much sugar and carbohydrates and your gut is I don't want to do any of this. Shouldn't we be sleeping? Yeah. What are you doing? Yeah. And you're so off that and temperature and effort, all of it factors in. It just becomes really hard. It just becomes very hard.
And as a perimenopausal woman, my gut is telling me that when I wake up in the morning normally, everything I've done, right? So I always I actually said to the 29 people and my community, no small wonder of women that was there were primarily women who were all in the same age group. And we're we need to start a perimenopausal 29 club. Cause I was training, I'm I am not losing muscle. I was I think overall I ended up losing 3 pounds of muscle. Definitely, you have a time period, the taper, and then, I didn't weigh myself until a week after recovery. So I'm sure, that the muscle loss is arbitrary. I expect at least a pound back on this week, but I feel really good about that. I think that the way that the program is often set up for endurance stuff is not to emphasize muscle. You got to emphasize muscle, but then some of your biggest muscles are your digestive tract muscles, and they're trying to respond to this ridiculous progesterone, estrogen, testosterone dance, and thyroid and, everything else. So I think that, really having a separate conversation about what digestion looks like, and, it's foundational to weight health in perimenopause and what it means to be an endurance athlete, which I now put myself in that club, in that space, at this life stage, we're hitting it hard while our body is being hit hard. And I think that's a unique spin on, on what the guys are going through on that part. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So how did you get into, this is, the book is Your Best Shot, the personalized system for optimal weight health, which is the first thing I want to talk about. GLP-1 shot or not. How did you get into this specific field?
Yeah, thank you. So how I got into being a dietitian, you can read about in the book, but the short version of it was super empowered, active, young girl, family. I had two brothers. Never thought I could, like, anything about being a girl was different other than maybe I wore a different swimsuit or I'd wear a dress. Like, that was it. And so I was always out there like much more like a boy. But around age 8, I started society, doctors, a bully in school. Some of the other girls started making fun of me and were like, you've got this belly and it's your problem. You're fat. This is your weight. And the unfortunate part was, at the time, it was such a disempowering message for somebody who actually was very empowered as a young girl, that what I did was I translated it into, well, I'm not going to have that belly. And so that meant the next 15 years of my life trying to do diet and exercise like in the absolute best way. Two big problems. One was I had been on antibiotics since I was 2 for ear infections, throat infections. So my gut function was destroyed already. And nobody was connecting those dots. Then I added oral contraceptives. Then I added alcohol, or maybe inverse. I don't know. Then I added like some, really not good, dieting choices. And it all, I really fell apart. Like, I was, when I graduated from college, I went to New York and I was working in advertising, and I was so, I was falling apart. Panic attacks, I would poop my pants. I just had all these different things going on. And after my final failed, I do think it was my final, failed dieting attempt, which was a 7-day goat's milk cleanse of all disgusting things. I ended up weirdly in a bar, because I'd returned to drinking alcohol, meeting a doctor, an integrative gastroenterologist, who said, thankfully, this has nothing to do with your weight. We didn't talk about this in the bar. I actually went to see him and my insurance paid for it. But he said, it's not your weight. This has nothing to do with it. Your digestive system doesn't have what it needs to run better. So he, in teaching me how and empowering me to actually fix, so instead of dieting, which is kind of like, if your car doesn't start, you don't go out and go oh, there's gas in the tank. Let me get rid of all the gas and see if it starts. You look under the hood, and he looked under the hood, right? So when I learned that, I was like, everyone needs to know this. So I quit. I became a registered dietitian. And in 2004, I was working with bariatric patients, people who were having weight loss surgery, which, if I'm honest, I was not on board for. I just felt that they hadn't found me soon enough. I had such an ego, right? I was like, I'll be able to help them. But what I learned was that we make GLP-1 and GIP in the lining of our digestive tract. And I learned that when we were able to, with the surgery, activate their hormones, their entire body's weight health, so bone, muscle, fat, water, the composition could change, as long as in conjunction with the surgery, we repaired their digestive health. So the people where the surgery didn't work for were the ones that just tried to eat protein, eat less, kind of all of that stuff. But the ones that followed my protocol for repairing their gut lining and moving forward. So I started a relationship with GLP-1 and GIP as a practitioner in 2004. And then was a part of some of the early research on Byetta liraglutide, the first medication. Why did I end up writing my book, and why today and the last 5 years for me have been nonstop? Because unfortunately, we're using this as a weight loss, as a diet tool, instead of, when we understand that these hormones are weight health hormones, just like we have sex hormones, and the medication is weight health hormone replacement therapy, we actually understand that what we can use the medication to do as a positive is to show our body what it's like when it actually has the hormone in a much higher amount than we would normally, but the receptor sites are satisfied. And what does that mean for bone, muscle, fat, hair, energy, all of those things. So I'll stop there, but that's the whole journey. And today I really feel like, this book could have existed at any point in time and just drop the GLP-1 shot or not part. I always want people to invest in their weight health and to break up with weight loss. But now that we're in the GLP-1 era, I felt like I really needed to make sure that we have a playbook. Whether you ever have a relationship with the medication, you absolutely have to optimize your own hormones. The body makes them, and they're essential for our functions. Yeah.
Let's pick apart both of those things. And
Great.
You keep using the term weight health, which is not something that falls on many people's ears very often. Define that.
Yeah. So weight health is where you look at, so I wanted us to just talk about health. I want us to just forget about weight. I think it's so dumb. Why would we use it? And then I realized our fat, our muscle, our bone, and our water, basically what the body is made up of, what our weight is made up of, actually is a signal. The type, the location, and the amount tells us about our health, just in the same way your blood sugar tells you about your health, just in the same way that your mood or your mental state or any of these things. So weight health to me is the approach that I've created it. So the definition and the idea here is that we actually can't look at health or metabolic health or anything else and not consider weight health in there. We need to decode the signals that our body is sending, but when we look at our weight composition.
I was just going to say, is it oversimplifying it to break it down as the composition of your body? I mean, and that's different from body composition. I mean that differently because where your fat is, if your fat is visceral versus subcutaneous versus where it's sitting, right?
Yes. And I even talk to people about, because I've worked with a lot of professional athletes over the years. I'm passionate about like how, for a lot of us, the reasons that we're so active today, well, many of us, it's our mental health sauce, but also it's from a physical standpoint, but it's because we want to be able to use our bodies so successfully at every decade forward, through that health span. So I'll even look at, I was just talking to a woman yesterday and I said, look, we have to acknowledge you have 1 pound more fat on your left arm and on your left leg. Like you're set up for an imbalance, like the way that your body, so how you're using your muscles. And, many of us have a dominant side, or we might have a leg that's slightly longer or shorter, or when you've had children or like me, when I've had a hysterectomy, how your body then aligns may cause us to be out of alignment in how we build muscle or where our fat mass is. So I will even look at that as a way to say like, hey, let's look at your training. But because we're working with her on losing fat mass, when we lose fat, let's see if we can, I don't want to exacerbate that imbalance. I want to direct that balance, to more favorable. But yeah, you're exactly right to simplify it that way.
So one's weight health clearly changes, or can change, often changes, I should say, with women across their lifespan. And I'm thinking particularly for this perimenopausal menopause transition audience, where even if the number on the scale, which is whatever it is, doesn't meaningfully move, you do see a migration of fat.
Yeah. And what we don't tend to see until we're I don't know why healthcare decides that, as you hit retirement age is a great time to look at your bone health. The idea that it was get a DEXA.
I bang that drum every day.
Yeah. 50s when you get a colonoscopy. So, when we should be looking at our bone health at every decade, because I dieted and had gut issues, and gut health is bone health, I have been on tracking my bone health very early on. But one of the things that we don't see when we're looking at the number on the scale is actually one of the, yes, we're making fat, but we're also often we're increasing bone resorption, breaking down bone, which is also a cardiovascular risk, right? Because then calcium is liberated and can go into our arteries as, and creating plaque on that part. So there's this whole picture of weight health that we have to look at it all together instead of just looking at the number. But you're right. Fat mass accumulation occurs. I want us to come back to a very important concept. It's not chicken or egg. Your hormones do start to be made, you make less of them, or they start to show up in different ways, highs, lows, etc. This is all happening and regulated by the gut, though. So when we take a gut optimization approach first, we are really starting out in a place where we're going to be able to successfully maintain bone, where we're going to be able to build build and maintain muscle, and where we're going to be able to manage fat mass more successfully in terms of what type of fat gets made, or even the ability to lose, to not put on additional fat mass. Yeah.
Yeah. And to take that one step further, so we're not conflating things, that when you do go through menopause, you still have the ovarian shutdown that is going to impact the hormones, right?
Yes.
Which also impacts hormones. Your gut health.
Yeah. Yes. And it doesn't just impact our sex hormones. I think because we've called estrogen a sex hormone, or progesterone, testosterone, we've really they're on our bone, they're in our brain. It has to do with heart health, et cetera. But we do have to remember when this is happening to our ovaries, at the same time, our weight health hormones, our thyroid hormone, the body's need for vitamin D is also a hormone, like all of these different hormonal. So it's a whole ecosystem picture. And if we just go outside and like water the garden, but the garden needed more nutrients in the soil, or the garden needed sunlight, then we end up in a problem. And so I also see one of the biggest flags on the field is right now, I'm excited about the appropriate attention to hormone replacement therapy for sex hormones. However, when you add sex hormones into a body that has been losing those sex hormones, you're now adding something that in and of itself, if it is not detoxified so that it can be eliminated when those hormones are used, and those hormones aren't eliminated, then you'll have recirculating hormone, which increases risk of cancer and other diseases. But also, if we do this appropriately and we optimize GLP-1 and GIP, and we're helping bone health, maybe we even use the hormone replacement therapy there in the case of like semaglutide or tirzepatide, even at a low dose. If we shrink fat cells, we're also liberating physical and emotional toxins. And if we don't detoxify and eliminate those, we actually worsen the impact. And so what I see with a lot of women is they are told, their doctor now is saying like, well, let's just add estrogen, or let's add a GLP-1 agonist. And we're not looking at the gut, and we're not looking at detoxification. And that really sets up a problematic. It's one of the reasons I wrote a playbook. You know, I'm like, all right, if you're going to do anything, HRT for sex hormones, for weight health hormones, if you're going to reduce your intake, if you're going to increase your exercise, whatever, you still need the playbook for how to optimize your weight health hormones, as part of this.
Right. And are you referring to and I'm going to butcher it, the
estrobolome.
Thank you, estrobolome.
Yeah.
I have always had trouble with that in
Me
the
too.
gut that helps to manage what you're talking about. The recirculating
and it's
or
so
the excretion of
interesting.
hormones.
Yes. And what's so interesting is, as somebody who, I got into this, I shared my story, like I got into this because of my gut health. And I always thought my gut was a tube, and I needed to pay attention to what happens inside the tube, right? I got to have good bacteria so I don't have too much bad bacteria. And I've got to make sure I'm getting fiber so that I eliminate, and I've got to, water, and all of that. Turns out the lining of our digestive tract, all throughout the body, but definitely around the intestines, that's where these hormones are made. And that's where places like estrogen receptors, et cetera. So you've got your L cells, you've got your K cells. Well, for most of us, we have at least one or two things in our lives that have insulted or injured the lining of the digestive tract. And so when we have when it's suboptimally functioning, we're going to see a worsening in that situation. And that absolutely is going to be part of the hormone play that's happening there, for sure.
So let's talk about those peptide hormones that we keep mentioning, but we haven't really totally defined. You introduced them in a concept of the switch when you talk about these peptide hormones. And GLP-1 is one of them. I think most people have heard that at least now. But there are others, amylin, PYY, there's others that you have in there. And you talk about how they activate insulin and the hormones that trigger appetite and satiety, and that they work a bit like a motion detector, which I did not know GLP-1 was so short-lived in our bodies.
So short-lived.
So talk about what those hormones are, their role.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, we know hormones to be messengers. So they go to receptor sites and they activate. So it's like form of, and they tell something else to happen, right? That's how they turn on. They're either made from fats or from proteins. So we have steroid hormones. Those are the ones I was talking about, like your sex hormones on that part. And then we have peptide hormones, which are made from proteins, of which insulin is a peptide hormone. So it's one of the reasons we have to get in enough amino acids, and we have to get in enough protein, and our body has to be able to turn it into amino acids so that we can make enough of these. And then we have a variety of them. So I'm so glad that you brought it up. I've changed my terminology because some people have said to me, Ashley, way too many analogies with the switch, but I'm going to explain the switch.
You do have a lot of analogies. I like them, but there are a lot.
I know it's hard. So really think about them as weight health hormones. I think that's going to help us, but they do switch on and off. So we have GLP-1. We also make GLP-2. We have GIP. We have CCK. We have PYY. We have oxymodulin, and we have amylin. Amylin right now is one of the only ones that we'll talk about over in the pancreas, because it's actually in the pancreatic beta cells. You're going to, in 2027, I wrote an article about this on my Substack if anyone's like pre-curious. But in 2027, we're going to be seeing and hearing all about aniline because this new medication is going to be coming out. But for right now, we'll focus on the gut side of it. And so they're in the cells of the gut, again, primarily in the intestines, although PYY a little bit lower down, and then CCK more in the stomach, because it has to do with our bile acids and our stomach acids on that part, and enzymes. And what they do is they're meant to switch on very quickly, because they're really sensory. So they're basically telling us, like, when you taste something, when you smell something, sometimes even they might be activated by the thoughts about something because the mouth waters, etc. But they actually send chemical messages, and they send them by way of the vagus nerve. So this is interesting, by way of your vagus nerve from your brain to your gut on that part. And then they travel by way of the vagus nerve and the bloodstream to get to receptor sites all throughout the body. So when we hear this, we should already be thinking protein. If we know they're made and deployed from the gut, we should be thinking about gut health. But I threw in their vagus nerve and bloodstream. So if our bloodstream is packed up with sugar, or if our blood flow is, otherwise hampered, maybe we have arterial plaque or other things, we might see a challenge with that. But our vagus nerve is really interesting because our vagus nerve as a transport system really wants to do that when we're in rest and digest. It wants us to be in a calm. My friend wrote the book, Upgrade Your Vagus Nerve. There's a lot of really, I think, more valuable work on polyvagal theory that's out there now. But know about your vagus nerve that if it is not safe, if it doesn't have the right nutrients, if you are sitting too often, if you're stressed, if you're over moving your body and as a result, really stressing it out and not giving it the recovery time, if you're not sleeping well, it's going to impair messaging. And so the question is it a flaw in human design? Have we aged evolutionary to a place where 2 to 5 minutes of GLP-1 and GIP being activated, they knock on the door of the L or the K cell and it gets sent where it's supposed to go? Is that 2 to 5 minutes from the time that it leaves the cell to where it's supposed to go just not enough time anymore? Mm. That is one question. I think the bigger point, though, is are we all not doing enough to optimize the system around the hormones, to create an efficiency? Now, 2 to 5 minutes goes on and off like a motion detector. When it's deactivated, some of the deactivated hormone can still be effective. So that's going to go where it's supposed to go. It tells insulin and glucagon how to work. That's your blood sugar system there. Appetite and leptin and ghrelin. So saying I'm full or I'm hungry on that part goes into your osteoblasts and turns off your osteoclasts. So osteoblasts are bone builders. Osteoclasts are bone suppressing. In the endothelial tissue of your arteries, we know that there are receptor sites there, which means that we're talking about the lining of your arteries, which is where plaque is formed and where, the integrity of that lining has so much to do with stroke and cardiovascular disease and, it's, et cetera on that part, blood pressure. We also know that there's involvement through, and they're looking at things in terms of immune cells and just kind of like, are we ultimately going to find receptor sites for GLP-1 and GIP alone in many places in our body? PYY and CCK are more involved in the digestive tract with helping the body to get nutrients where they're supposed to go in a timely manner. And PYY is actually involved in things like magnesium reabsorption to make sure we don't eliminate the magnesium we're taking in, and that our hydration status, that our cells actually retain water and electrolytes for usage. So when you look at all of this, we start to see how pretty much every health challenge that a woman can experience, especially at this life stage, is going to be related, to these hormones. And when I look at the medications that we have today, most of all of the tides, so semaglutide, retatrutide, and tirzepatide, not orforglipron, Fondio, it's over in its own category. But those are peptide hormones. They're designed exactly like your body's own, with a key distinction. They stay on for a day or they stay on for 7 days. So the question I always present to someone who's using it even at a low dose is, if you had a motion detector outside in front of your house that goes on, like when something comes in front of, you might pay electric bill of, 5 minutes times 6 times in a day, all right, 30 minutes. If you leave town and you left it on accidentally for a week, you're paying a really significant electric bill. And part of that electric bill is not being in rest and digest as much. And part of that electric bill is delaying gastric emptying, because that's how the signaling in the body works. There are tons of pros. Part of that, the benefit there is there was a light on all the time. Nobody's going to come break into your house. The equivalent there is you're probably not going to feel food noise at all. You're probably not going to experience appetite the way that you experienced it. Your bone cells may actually be getting the hormone that they needed, that they weren't getting. Your heart muscle, your heart, your artery walls, et cetera. So there's pros and considerations, like absolutely every single medication that exists. So it's not like this isn't unique. We have to evaluate that for the individual and really personalize a plan around that. Otherwise, we end up in places where somebody says, well, I used something that was on for 7 days and I'm really surprised that I'm losing hair. Or they blame a medication for us losing muscle. No, it's not that. It's that your guts can't break down and use the protein that you're taking in. It's not deploying it in a timely manner. It's not getting where it's supposed to go. Maybe you're too tired to work out the way that you were working out. And maybe you're also not hungry enough to actually get in the nutrients, that your body needs. But it wasn't the medication that, the medication doesn't go in and go, I'm going to block muscle formation, like that kind of thing. So that's, I think, how we have to unpack and really look at these medications in a different way and understand, can they be a tool for someone? But for anyone, your own GLP-1 and GIP, that 2 to 5 minutes, we have to optimize that because all of these different hormonal responses depend on it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a ton. We could go full Joe Rogan and talk for hours on this.
I know.
But,
I know.
But, what you say, I have long thought that there's so much going on that we have not evolutionarily caught up to the modern society that we have landed in, that has us stressed out without an outlet of fighting or flighting unless we purposely climb mountains for 29,000 feet or go do a thing. And we are surrounded by, I call it calorie pollution, because, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. We have abundance, but we're not evolutionarily, hardwired for abundance. So, and this makes sense when you see all these other benefits that seem to be coming from the use of these drugs at different levels that are independent of weight loss, and people are trying to figure out what's going on. When you talk about how they're working in all of the different aspects and organ systems, it makes sense. It also, there's that research, which I'm sure you're aware of, and we'll talk about, that shows a synergistic relationship perhaps between hormone therapy and a tirzepatide, where they do the research and
they're both hormone therapy. Both hormone therapy, So of course there's that would be like somebody putting on an aha face and being like, what if I optimized your thyroid hormone and your estrogen? You're like, aha, it's it totally makes sense. We can't, so look, we've gotten so much wrong. For so long, we started off the blood sugar conversation with insulin. We now, the general public knows what I knew in 2004, and what physicians knew certainly before that, who focused on this area. And that is that there are hormones that tell insulin and glucagon to go to work. So even if you are insulin resistant, if we start to try to treat that from insulin forward, and we don't look at, is the resistance because the hormones behind it aren't telling it to go to work on time? If a kid's late for school, you're like, did you miss your bus? Did you not wake up on time? Did you, lollygaggle while you were walking? There's a lot of different reasons. And so one of the things that we have to do is, unpack the reasons. I love what you said about the calorie thing too. I think we have an easier time understanding, and I'm going to offer up based on what you told me about your community and who's listening. We all challenge our bodies regularly because we understand that the concept of being comfortable, all the conveniences of modern life, actually has presented an unhealthy challenge on our body. Just
100%.
I talk about in the book, when we created the remote control, really, that was one of the best things that we had to do, was to get up off of our tushies and go change, the channel, right? And so I think in that part, what we haven't made peace with or recognized is that when we make ourselves comfortable with food on every level, we are actually challenging the digestive system and the body there. And it doesn't mean that I want our food to irritate our system, but one of the reasons that I kind of giggle when I use the term intermittent fasting, because I have a lot of people that tell me well, I start eating at 7 and I finish at 7. And I was like, oh, okay, like sunrise to sunset, in the summer, whatever, it's like that to me isn't fasting. That's just, I have an activity and an eating window and I have a recovery window. But when we get down to something like a 4-hour window, or I had somebody the other day where she's like, I'm in an 18-6, the amount of discomfort she's putting on her body in those 6 hours is too much, right? So we have to find the place with our nutrition, like we find the place with our workouts and our training, which is what's the right amount of challenge, that we want to give to our body. We don't want to give our body too much at one time. We don't want to be like, I'm going to eat a little bit more now because I might not eat later. No, your body wants you to eat less now, an appropriate amount, give it what it needs. It's like a race car, and then let it go do its couple of laps and then come back for a full pit stop. And I think that it may be easier to lean into that on the fitness side than it has been on the nutrition side. Still need to lean into it for a lot of them. Not this audience for a lot of people, but your audience probably doesn't need to hear how important it is to challenge our bodies. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
Generally not. They need the other part, like how to recover from those challenges.
Recovery. Yeah.
So let's talk about what we can do for this wide berth of hormonal health that you're talking about. You have, and you've talked about it very much on this show already, you've many pages devoted to digestion and hydration. And I think a lot of people would be surprised by that if they just picked up the book blind. But talk about what we can do, especially at this time of our life. Independent of hormones, we can talk about inserting the hormones afterwards, but what are the lifestyle and other behaviors, digestive behaviors that we can follow to make sure that these hormones are all of them are behaving downstream and upstream the way they're supposed to?
Yeah. So the key thing is to just acknowledge they're never going to behave the way they were supposed to. So we're always going to be a little bit behind, right? I remember when I was on the mountain and my coach said, remember, you're never going to be at a caloric balance. You're going to be in a deficit during this, So just own that, right? And here's how that feels. And so he's like, let's just try to have you not at such a bad deficit. So I think what's interesting is if you decide to use HRT, this is completely non-optional. What I want to present for somebody is this is the way you optimize, especially if you're not using HRT of sex or weight health hormones. Okay. The 4 things for us to understand. Digestion is never going to be optimal. We always need to be working to optimize it. So we should be decoding our digestive signals all the time. That does not mean microbiome testing and buying all these and doing things. I have in the book. It's also free in my Substack if somebody doesn't buy the book. By the way, you can borrow the book from the library. But in terms of looking at this, there are questions that we need to be asking about our digestion and making sure that we don't say the common answer is, no, I don't have an issue with that. If you tell me you regularly use your bowels and the follow-up to that, you regularly move your bowels on waking, and the follow-up to that is that you do it after you have coffee, you have now told me that you don't actually regularly move your bowels. So if you remove your coffee for a day or two and you don't move your bowels in the morning, I now know that you've been band-aiding a signal that is actually a very important hormonal signal. Okay, so that's one. Digestion and hydration I tie together, and I think this is important because a key part of your what your body needs is there's no food that's healthy to your body. Your body only deems something healthy when it's broken down into usable nutrients and they arrive where they're needed in an amount and a form that can be used, and the body goes to work and uses them. And then it's like, check the box, chickpeas, yay, or whatever on that part, right? So one of the things that we have to remember is that hydration is not about drinking water. Hydration is not about how much water you have in the body. Hydration is about water being, and the nutrients that bring it there, water being where it needs to be in the amount that it's needed in all those different parts in the body. So hydration, like digestion, is the process of escorting nutrients and a substance, i.e. water, where it's supposed to go. So those two are non-optional. We'll talk about how in a second. Managing your inflammatory response, which is totally tied to your stress response, is 100% important. And remembering or learning for many of us that it's not about preventing inflammation. This is not a structure to be anti-inflammatory. It is to make sure that your body is getting the signals to turn off inflammation. And that we call resolution or resolving inflammation. And then the fourth one that's critical is detoxification. So detoxification means that we have to eliminate the toxins that are accumulating from the act of living healthfully, absolutely, but also, when we're releasing things from our fat cells or when there are things that come in that are not healthy to us. And if something is in a fat soluble format, it has to be converted into a water soluble format to be eliminated. And that requires a phase 1 and a phase 2 of detoxification. So when we look at all of those are the non-optional approach. That's like foundational. And I can't have my detoxification system working, but my hydration and my digestion suboptimally working. And so what I really laid out in the book is that digestion and hydration are like the crust of your pizza, if you will. And I think too many of us, because we've been brought up in a diet and your food is what matters for your weight, and even for your health, to a certain extent, we have been jumping in at the sauce, which is our total nutrition, our food and our supplements. But none of that matters if your digestion and hydration isn't set up. So the first thing is decoding the signals. And I go through just very clearly, things like is stuff going in the wrong direction? Do I feel full after I eat? Some of these other pieces. And then when we are evaluating that, we then look at, even within digestion, there are 4 subparts. So motility, breakdown, absorption, and elimination. Which component or which component, if many of them are not working, which one do I address first? I usually address motility because if things aren't moving along, it's going to trigger an elimination issue, and some of the other stuff. And if hydration is suboptimal, we're definitely leaning into addressing that. And I give it the whole book, literally the upfront is talking about the why of this. And then the whole rest of the book is a playbook, for how to do it. And it also includes a QR code that sends people to my community. Now that sounds like a marketing play, and it was really just a panic for me. I was like, wait, this has to be personalized. And if somebody's just reading my book and trying to figure it out, where do they go if they have a question? So we actually staff a team there that if you have questions, you can come in and answer those questions. So when we're looking at that, we usually start with digestion and hydration, and then work on also optimizing inflammation and detoxification as we move along. And most of that is I might have you experimenting with some of the principles of total nutrition, but most of that actually comes before we're even looking at your food on that part.
This is a naive question, but how do you divorce the two when what I eat affects my digestion?
Great point. That's the only part of the digestion piece that we're going to include in there. So as an example, your total nutrition, if you are insufficient, suboptimal amount of magnesium, we are going to be looking at how we get magnesium in. Is that going to be from food or is that going to be from supplements? And we'll move that in there. And if you're consuming too much at one time, or maybe you're consuming at the wrong time or an imbalance and it's negatively impacting your gut, we are going to be leaning into that. So I will have those cues in there, but I'm not doing a whole overhaul of your total. I get into the total nutrition. How do we optimize that? As once I know that we've got, because everyone, unless they're in the hospital being fed intravenously, has some degree of digestive function. So there's some work that is going to be happening. But one of the things that I'll note in there is you might need to shift your eating, your after workout or your evening meal for this time period until we optimize your digestion better to a liquid, because we are just not, by the evening, you're not digesting in the way that I would like to. And as a result, that evening meal is having a negative impact on all of these different things versus a positive. So yeah, it's a really good question. I intertwine them. It's not never will the two mix. It's just that I don't start with the food part first. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not giving people a macronutrient breakdown right out of the gate. Is what
right? Exactly.
We might not even change the macros, but adjust the timing.
Yes, or the balance of them. I don't do daily macros at all. I always look at the pit stop macros on that part, because I get too many people are being told 100 or 150 grams of protein, and I'm like, wait, stop. First of all, is your body using the protein, able to use and eliminate the protein that you're taking in? But the second thing is, we know with protein, what we want to be doing is having tracking it at every one of those pit stops, right? And at least 15 grams, not these like 5 or 6 grams of I got some protein in, but at least 15 grams to help stabilize blood sugar. And then some of us are going, having meals that are higher than 30 or 40 grams of protein at a sitting. That might work for you if your digestion is good. For most people, I usually have to pull back, and maybe I play with amino acids, via supplementation a little bit, but usually I will just offer more pit stops. And so a lot of the stuff to unlearn is are these daily total weight, total cholesterol, total calories. Like that's not how the body works. Yeah.
And how much of this, I'm hearing a lot of individuality, of course.
Yeah.
Is it all individual? Are there universal tenets that come into this digestive piece?
Yeah, the tenets are all universal. The thing that we all have to do is recognize that we are individual. So how it gets applied, and what I also want to encourage and remind everyone, the individual part of it is also, Celine on Tuesdays does this, or Tuesday nights always has a less good night's sleep because of this. And so by Thursday or Wednesday, we need to do this differently, right? So it's also not this idea, like one of the things that's not great is like a recommendation for someone that's like, oh, this is what works for your body. No. The job that I have is to teach you to decode your body's signals. So the tenets are there. So motility works this way in a human body. Now let's understand is if your motility is impaired and we can understand the why, we can now help you work on it. But it's your job to decode and say, oh, my motility is suboptimal right now. Yeah.
And what about hydration?
Yeah, hydration's interesting. So I tried to simplify it more without oversimplifying it. So I use something called a hose versus a sponge. So if you are drinking water, and many of us are drinking a lot of water, some people might be throwing in a lot of electrolytes, et cetera. But if we're drinking water and we're peeing it out, we are a hose. We're not a sponge. So the first thing that we can do is really make sure that we're absorbing and bringing the water where it's supposed to go. So for that, I have people you drink about 8 to 10 ounces of water and you see how long it is until you have to pee. Then I have them go through that, and we can do that. Like I challenge people to do that when they're really stressed, like in the midst of a workout. We might do that one time, or after a workout, or right after you've had your coffee. They're like, I'm always peeing after I've had my coffee. Aha. That means that the water wasn't being absorbed. So that means that whatever nutrients at that point had less of a, good time. So how do we remedy that? And we then personalize your hydration around trying to get you to be more of a sponge.
And what does that look like? Sometimes.
Well, so I have 3 parts to it. There's your water intake. So for a lot of people, I like to make sure that we're pit stopping regularly for water rather than having big amounts of water at one time. The second thing is we're looking at your electrolytes, and it's your total electrolyte balance. So it's your sodium from foods and maybe your sodium from supplements, or it's your magnesium, and all of these different things, and looking at it from a balance standpoint, how your magnesium compares to your calcium, like as an example. And then the third category, which I think doesn't get the attention that it needs to, are the dehydrators, the known dehydrators. So look, sugar is a dehydrator. When you have sugar in your bloodstream, the cells take water out of them and deliver it into the blood so that it can hopefully have less stickiness, in the bloodstream, right? So our body works in this way where when we consume more sugar, we're dehydrating more. So how do I then balance that part out? And the same could be said for things like alcohol and to a certain extent caffeine. This doesn't mean we can't have those things. It means we just have to understand that in that moment, there's more of a dehydration. Medications are a big factor on that part. Sweat is a big factor. Stress, hugely important, on that piece. So we'll work on different things. If somebody is getting up in the middle of the night because they have to pee, I have a lot of women, I think men talk about that very openly, but one of the gifts of perimenopause for a lot of women in menopause has been waking up in the middle of the night, not just because we're hot, but also because we're like, oh, I have to pee. So if that's happening, then that's telling me that this whole situation is happening while you're sleeping, which means that you're also suboptimally recovering. And remember, you were just talking about how important, recovery is. So what we'll do is we'll backtrack and look at what's happening in your afternoon, your evening, et cetera, on that part. And we'll work on optimizing hydration until we have it where you're not getting up to pee on that part. Yeah.
So then two questions. Let me backtrack a minute. What if I optimize as best as I can these two pieces, this digestion and hydration that are intertwined, will that in of itself impact my weight health?
Hugely. Hugely.
Okay.
That's almost like where across the board, that's been like 3/4 of my career, where somebody comes to me for a weight issue or a cholesterol issue, but they're like, I wouldn't mind losing a handful of pounds. Or maybe they come to me for something totally different and they were like, I think my belly's gone down. Oh yeah. Like as soon as you, especially with belly fat, because that is the digestive system being like, like this is not working the way that we want it to work. So that's why, like, low hanging fruit, I'm in it to win it. Like the only product that I sell is this, like how to help you get that result, right? So since I'm not like hawking something that you go like try or not try, I'm not part of the weight loss industry. It's like, okay, how do I help you? Lowest hanging fruit, digestion and hydration. Now, what it doesn't mean is that, and I think this is an important statement, it doesn't mean if we optimize digestion and hydration, and remember, we don't get to do it, check the box and be like, we're done. But if we figure out how to consistently be doing this and maintain more time in a more optimal space there, right, on that part. So if we're going through and we're doing that and we turn around and we say, okay, I'm doing that. And then we come over and we're like, okay, so now are my weight health hormones working perfectly? Not necessarily, because that's where your vagus nerve, the bloodstream, and even it could also be that where your body is today, that 2 to 5 minutes just isn't enough, or even enough of your production may not be enough to get to all those different receptor sites, right? And so that's where I do have people who will come to me who have said, I'm doing everything right. And we decode, and I'm like, you know what? This is looking real good. Like you're working on the digestion's in good place. Like we don't have any inflammatory markers that seem off the chart. Here's this, but you've put on like 10 to 15 pounds. And by the way, I will never use the term vanity weight. This is not a vanity conversation. If you've put on 5 pounds of belly fat, and suddenly your body is giving me a signal, right? Or if you've lost bone, it's giving me a signal to manage. That might be a place where I say, you know what? In this time period of transition, and I actually we can use less of other medications and less of other hormones. Maybe that is a good time period for us to use these hormone replacement therapies strategically. And that's where we have that conversation. Yeah.
And in this case, you're blanketing hormone therapy, including GLP-1. It's like,
right. I'll say the two different. So what I meant there to say thank you for saying that, like, is they might need estrogen, progesterone. Look, I have a lot of women who, for like maybe past history or current, they're still on tamoxifen and other things. And they're like, I cannot use estrogen therapy. And I'm like, look, your bones will benefit from some GIP. So let's use tirzepatide. Your brain health and your cardiometabolic health will benefit from some GLP-1 and GIP. So let's use this. So sometimes I'm able to help someone where they feel like another tool is not available to them. Other times we might use estrogen, progesterone, testosterone to optimize, but then realize that when we are able to use the GLP-1 agonist, we may be able to address the problem like in an ecosystem way, kind of the same way as if I did estrogen and thyroid hormone. And I do a lot of thyroid hormone work with GLP-1s, and we're able to optimize. So use them all together. Yeah. That
makes sense. And we didn't talk much about the detoxification system. There is very interesting. And my impression with some of the detoxification or the toxins was also with the drugs, sometimes people lose weight quickly, maybe more
real
quickly
fast.
than right. And that's where I think some of that muscle loss also comes in, because whenever you
not
lose a
hair
lot of
loss.
weight very quickly.
Yes. Yes.
But when I know that there will be people in my audience who's like, ears perk, they hear detox, they think master cleanse, they think goat, they think whatever.
Yeah.
So I want to be very clear what we're talking about here, and
Great.
How, when you're talking about it and thinking about it, are we talking about the health of our liver and our kidneys and those other organ systems, or how are you framing that?
Yeah, primarily your liver, but definitely your kidneys. I usually tie kidneys because they're more of like the end process. So I think of them with hydration and elimination, but you're smart to include that in there. Look, our livers we have not loved our livers. Like they're like that is and that is definitely like a consequence of modern living for a lot of things. And I'm not just talking about alcohol. I'm not talking about necessary medications and treatments. Like there's a lot in our environment that isn't better. And there are some people will talk about 3 phases of detoxification. I'm going to try to not make it too complicated, but phase 1 and phase 2, where and what's interesting is that we also have genetics that impact the efficiency of phase 1 and phase 2. So as an example, one of the things that I see when I look at genetic, like a nutrigenomic test for someone, I see this a lot. So like I think basically almost everybody has some variation, like either they have a faster phase 1 and maybe a slower phase 2. So part of our job is to also try to get it where phase 1 and phase 2 are working at a synergistic pace. So you don't have like things, blocking up against each other. It's nutrient dependent. And one of the things that I offer out there as a supposition is that the body, if it has a suboptimal intake, if we only take in so much calcium or so much magnesium, it's going to go through its priority list, not ours. Like it doesn't care what your hair looks like or if you have hair. But it definitely cares if your heart pumps. So it's going to be like, okay, calcium, magnesium, I'm going to put you there. If I have some left over, I might build bone. Like I might like turn off your stress response. Well, we need those in our detoxification, and the liver's like kind of often gets, kind of left out. And it's like, I might not have enough of the resources that I need. And then there are some antioxidants like glucoraphanin, which requires an enzyme called myrosinase in the digestive tract to create sulforaphane. Sulforaphane in the brain and in the liver plays a very important role in supporting that phase 2, and that phase 2 is where you take fat soluble toxins that are in a fat form, right? Because maybe they've come from your fat cell or they're like that steroid hormone that's made from fat, and it needs to be broken down. They call it conjugation. It needs to be broken down so that it can be eliminated. So if your phase 2 doesn't have the sulforaphane, then that's going to be like an issue for, hey, this might not be working as efficiently, right? And I think one of the other big pieces of modern day is we just have too many toxins. Now, I'm probably one of the only people that also talks about our emotions as toxins, but I've been in this business way too long. And one of the reasons I'm against fast weight loss is our weight, and this is personal, our weight traps our toxins. And when we shrink those fat cells, we might be really happy with ourselves. We might like the way we look. We might like the way we feel. We might like the way we are on the scale. But society has other things in store for us. Someone else might be jealous of the way that we are losing weight. I remember when I lost weight one time, I had my tonsils taken out at about age 19, and I got an infection. And so I literally couldn't eat for like 3 weeks, and I lost a lot of weight really quickly. And I went back to Manhattan, and I must have been like 20. I was like the hot girl. And I was like, wait, I've never been hot. And it was alarming. And then I found myself drinking a lot of alcohol because I didn't know what to do in a social situation. I got myself into sexual situations that were terrifying, things like that. And it's like those toxins are stored in the fat cells. So when we shrink those, and we come over and we do that at too fast of a pace, even though I understand the desire to take off unwanted weight, if your body can't keep pace and you can't process these mentally, your body can't process it physically, we often end up in a place where we see statistics of things like when someone stops a GLP-1 agonist, 65% of weight is regained within a year, full weight regain, and it's regained as fat. And there's some truth to that, but what that 65% doesn't unpack is why did someone stop it? There are 4 reasons. Only one of which is they optimized their weight health. And I will guarantee that that's a much smaller percentage of the people who are stopping. Most people are stopping because they can't tolerate the side effects because they haven't worked through, this protocol to reduce or eliminate those. They may not have finances or access to it any longer. And then also they may have a health issue that arose, a positive one or a challenging one that's where their doctor's like, you can't stay on this any longer. And in all 3 of those people, when you just go off of a medication, of course your body goes back to 2 to 5 minutes versus 7 days, and it's not working optimally, and here's fat regain, right? So I think all of this has to do with why we want to pace things slower, and really have the idea be about weight health optimization, not about weight loss or diabetes. We haven't even had the diabetes conversation here, which is why the medications were created, but optimizing blood sugar on that part.
So as we come up to the top of the hour, are there any, I don't know, do you have any case studies or stories or anything that you think that would resonate with this audience particularly?
Yeah, I think I'll share one because this was unique that I get to talk about it in this audience. First of all, I will also say that it depending on what caliber of activity you're doing, they're monitoring GLP-1s as a performance enhancement drug because of people like Serena. I have 4 professional athletes who are in the World Cup who are using GLP-1 agonists. I have other people who are training for Olympics. So I think it's an important thing for us to watch and for us to understand, and especially if that's going to be a factor for you. I want to bring this up because one of the things that happens in perimenopause is that many women will all of a sudden be pre-diabetic. It's like all of a sudden my A1C went from 5.3 to 5.7, et cetera. And they are told to not eat sugar, or they're told to not eat carbs. And of course, they're told to eat high protein. And it just starts this vicious cycle. So one of the things I was working with a woman like this, and I was literally like, okay, everything else looks good. Like we're at all of the, this other stuff. And she was actually asking me, do I need a GLP-1 agonist? My doctor is saying maybe I should microdose, which is really their more like biohack term for a low dose. Cause the microdose wouldn't have done anything for the blood sugar. And I made a pretty strong case. I've made the case to her. She's great with it. I had to really make the case to the physician that, the A1C is a really inaccurate measure. Like it is a 90-day average. It doesn't tell me anything about when your blood sugar is going high or low, or anything else like that. And basically the conversation that we had was until you have some stabilization in your hormones, we're not going to see that A1C, like she still had rolling hills. It was just the rolling hills were happening at about 110, which was pushing her like into the 130, and kind of going like this. Whereas it used to be like eating same thing, exercising same way, et cetera. She was in the 80 to the 120. And so that's, what had happened. So part of what we did, we wore a continuous glucose monitor. She wore it. I decoded it. We looked at things like stress and sleep, and we were able to, do some optimization. So she hangs out at about a 5.6 now, but we just took it off the table. We're not using it as a marker. We are using, her ApoB is improved, like every other marker has improved. And I was like, I will not be okay. And ultimately what I said to her is, I think the concern I had about her going on a GLP-1 agonist, and she was like, I don't want to lose. Like, this is not about fat loss or anything else like that. I said, my concern is that we're going to play with your gut function and suddenly we're going to tip something into a place where, or your recovery, your rest and digest time period. So, I would add that threefold here, because what this woman did do is she's a very intensely active, like she's moving all the time. She's like, a high powered executive, that kind of thing, trains like ferocious, loves to throw stuff around, et cetera. And so one of the things that we had to monitor with her continuous glucose monitor was to make sure that between her exercise and her recovery, she wasn't hanging out too high for too long. And that, that was really important. But that was a case where we absolutely were optimizing her GLP-1 and GIP by way of the approach that I'm talking about here. But there was not, in my opinion, it still is contraindicated. I did say to her once her hormones stabilize a little bit more, because they're playing with a estrogen and testosterone optimization. At that point, we could consider it, but also somebody's gonna have to prove to me that there would be a value in that for me to have to do all the work to reset, with her to reset her digestion and stuff. So just things to think about on that part.
Yeah, I've spoken about this many times on the show, but it is remarkable how stress affects your blood sugar. I have seen it in real time doing experiments with CGMs, and I'm just like, that is my main driver, honestly, I can just see it.
Yeah. And what's so crazy, I talk about this in the book, I share it online, but there are 40 factors that impact your blood sugar. 10 of them are nutrition, and only 3 of them are carbs, right? In different, the amount, the timing, and the quantity. I suppose we could argue quality we'll throw a 4th in there, but that's like the CGMs that are being used as a carb story, like where everyone's going from banana to cauliflower, is like ridiculous. Like it's just, totally. It's such malpractice on that part, and a lot of it is AI driven, in that way. So, there's tons more to this. There's, and again, one of the reasons I create these resources, and y'all, my Substack is free. So I also talk, about this on there. And maybe we'll come back and we'll do the whole blood sugar side of it, at a different point. But it's so important when we think about, if you're locked in your brain and you have the wiring that is like, I love to move and challenge my body, like hold on to that. But just remember that, when you're thinking about muscles and you're doing things that really challenge your muscles, that your digestive tract is a set of muscles and it's integrally related to all of these, right? Or when you're pushing your brain and you're, doing these things that without recovery, your vagus nerve is like, So I've been sleeping with the Apollo. It's, Vegas, like a Vibe, device for vagus nerves. And since my event, that I haven't had a day where I was sore. And I obviously have been slow to get back. I'm pacing myself with getting back in my workouts. But I'm pretty much back to full time with how I like to work out after a week. And I credit it 100% to what I've done for recovery. And I think that's we have to train recovery as intensely as we train, the training or whatever the activity is. Yeah.
Well, I really, really appreciate you coming on here. It's such a fascinating, nuanced discussion that I think is long overdue. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with that we haven't talked about, or just any final words that you have?
No, as I said, I'm totally stoked like that. I feel like I'm excited to learn more and learn from your audience. So thank you. It's great to find a community like this and to, just really be thinking about it and having these nuanced conversations. So I'm grateful for that part.
Well, thanks so much. And we will put all the links in the show notes so people can find you. Well, that is our show. Come on back next week when I take a deep dive into all things pelvic floor health for active women with urogynecologist Dr. Lauren Siff. She has so much great advice on incontinence and prolapse and all the stuff that can really derail our active lives. It was a great conversation. So come on back for that one. And until then, as always, stay feisty. You have been listening to Hit Play Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active performance-minded women. I'm your host, Celine Yeager. This show is edited and produced by the most amazing Carrie Barrett and the other talented, strong women at Feisty Media. Follow us on social media at Feisty Menopause, and please help us spread the word. Screenshot and share this episode on your social media channels with the tag @FeistyMenopause. And please subscribe, like, review, and rate this show wherever you get your podcasts. Word of mouth and good reviews make it easier for other listeners to find. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay feisty.